Welcome to this week's meeting of the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. I really appreciate the idea of environmental focus in Rotary nowadays, and that is something that is so important. I was literally sitting at the lunch table with my family, talking with my 11-year-old about impacts and how September of 2023 was one of the hottest on record. In addition to that, there are a number of impacts on the environment, and one of those is around tobacco. Tom Novotny is talking to us today about that. And I really loved learning and hearing about it. And I hope you do too. Have a great week.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. Every week, we bring you the stories of those who make a difference in the lives of others around the world. Service is the thing in Rotary. Rotary International is 1.4 million people around the world who believe in service above self. This is 36,000 clubs, sets of folks who essentially get together and say, how can we work together to make something better? And in our club, the E-Club of Silicon Valley, Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, what we're doing is we are doing a number of projects. And one of the projects that we see ourselves as having the good fortune to take on is sharing the stories that will inspire others to see possibilities for how they can serve their communities as well. And in the environmental space, we have today a speaker who's going to talk to us about cigarettes. Now, we know about health issues related to cigarettes, but you may not know about the environmental issues related to cigarettes. And we're going to hear about that in detail from Tom. Tom Novotny is the professor emeritus of epidemiology and biostatistics at the San Diego State University School of Public Health here in California and San Diego. Tom, we are really happy to have you, and I hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you very much, Rustin, and welcome to you all. I'm very pleased to be able to present this, I hope, new information to you about tobacco and its influence on the environment. And again, as Rustin pointed out, it's a big deal still for health. It's still one of the most important causes of preventable illness in the world. Still, there's 1 billion smokers around the world. We're down to about 30 million here in the United States, which is a huge improvement. We've gone from 52% of people smoking down to less than 12% now nationally, adults. And that's a huge accomplishment, but it's still, again, there are 30 million smokers. And there's a lot more, in terms of the number of cigarettes. I'll get into that. I just want to say how much I do appreciate the Rotary Club. I've had a lot of interaction with them. I used to be with the U.S. government as a public health service officer and had a lot of interaction. Immunization program is among many other things. And I've had the opportunity to give several talks here in San Diego to different Rotary clubs in the local area. So it's very familiar to me and I'm very appreciated. So I want to set up some slides here to help frame this issue. And I'm representing a whole bunch of different people today, but we have a new Center for Tobacco and the Environment here at San Diego State University. This is funded by tax money from the tobacco tax. It's called the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program. It goes through the University of California. And we've just been funded for a 4-year grant to set up a Center for Tobacco and the Environment. And this comes as an opportune time in history, I think. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the life cycle effects of tobacco on the environment. It's not just cigarette butts, which is what I'm going to really focus on, tobacco product waste. There's other kinds of tobacco product waste besides butts, and I'll mention that. But nevertheless, that's a big one, and it's coming into focus for a lot of people, both in the environmental side as well as the public health side. And we'll talk a little bit about what is being done and what could be done or what might be done by others, and also something that is just now become reality, which is a treaty on plastics. It's in the negotiation process, and I'll explain to you how it applies to tobacco products as well. So we're going to talk a little about the filtered cigarette in particular, because it is a plastic. So filter on cigarettes is a non-biodegradable plastic. We'll talk a lot about what kind of public messages there are, both sort of misinterpreted and also what we need to do in the future. So just to kind of set the stage about the life cycle issues, it's a full service insult, just like it is a full service insult to the human body. at the beginning, growing tobacco is hard on land. It makes farmers in some ways dependent on the tobacco industry for, their resource, seeds and plants and fertilizers, etc. It's also very hard on families because they oftentimes are children involved in this, and it is an issue of social justice as well. That then impacts the health system as well as the environment. The manufacturing process in that second column is also a very dirty process. When they make low nicotine yield cigarettes, for instance, they denicotinize cigarettes. This becomes a waste product and gets dumped into the water systems, as well as other chemicals, many of which are on what are called the toxic release inventory that the EPA establishes. The middle part here is consumer and the act of smoking. So we all know, I think, about tobacco smoke as being a hazardous as secondhand smoke. That is the smoke that comes off the tip of a filter as well as from the lungs of a smoker into the ambient air. And we've got lots of restrictions on this now, work sites, schools, every place. In California, you can't go to a bar or restaurant without it being smoke-free. And there's a good reason for that, because secondhand smoke is the second leading cause of lung cancer, with smoking being the first leading cause. This has impacts on the health system, on businesses, on productivity, and the environment as well. There's something called thirdhand smoke, which is the residuals that are left behind in these environments as a result of smoking that just doesn't go away. Those of you who have purchased a house or rent a house or moved into a place where there have been smokers realize that it just doesn't go away. It gets absorbed into the drywall. It's a hazardous material. We've been doing a lot of research on this thirdhand smoke. I can talk more about that later if we like. The disposal of tobacco products, again, we're talking about cigarette butts. We're also talking about e-cigarettes. We're talking about hookah water that goes into the, wastewater stream. We're talking about any kind of tobacco product, snus packets, those are also tossed into the environment. And so we have environmental challenges. And then finally, we're looking at land and water impacts overall, meaning what this can do ecologically. It's not just that they're a hazard to clean up. It's not just that they're a pain in the butt to clean up. It's that they have ecosystem toxicity, meaning that the services that we expect from our ecosystems, the pleasures, the appreciation of pristine environments is insulted. And there can be actually a cost to that as well. And I'll talk more about that later. So get this. I hope the screen is showing without my, there. Okay. Tobacco product waste is the single most littered item in the world. The beach pickups that you may see every year are one of the main reasons or main vehicles that we know this happens. Every year in September, the volunteers go around the world and pick up butts from the beach. They get maybe 1 million or so. That's about 30% of all the litter that they pick up. In urban areas, it's between 10 and 20% of all the litter that's picked up from urban pickups. What we have, though, is a much bigger problem than what is just picked up, because there are almost 6 trillion cigarettes smoked or sold each year globally. And we don't know how many of those are just dropped into the environment, but if they are not dropped into the environment, they end up in landfills, which is still a form of waste that we have to manage. And it may be that maybe 2/3 are actually dumped as cigarette butts. Maybe it's 1/3. I don't know, but that's trillions. And we don't have a way of counting every single butt, obviously. What we do know is that consistently, these are the most commonly picked up items. 99% of these are filtered, mainly with the acetate filter, as I mentioned. They weigh about 3.4 grams for a pack of cigarettes. And this ends up being in the United States, where there are 200 plus billion cigarettes sold as of 2022, I believe, 2021. That means about 35.3 million kilograms of cigarette butt waste that get dumped in the environment. Again, non-biodegradable plastic. And it doesn't include all of this other stuff that's associated with smoking, like lighters, matches, etc. And we find those in our pickups as well. So the cellulose acetate filter, again, this is non-biodegradable plastic. It is an additive. It's not manufactured by the tobacco companies. It's manufactured by Celanese or Eastman Kodak, believe it or not. And it is something that's been put on cigarettes over the last 50 to 60 years in response to the health concerns. It's been there to keep particles of tobacco out of the mouth, but also to sell cigarettes. I mean, that is its purpose. It means that the marketing of this is all around reducing the tar and nicotine delivery. Well, these are machine measured items that are machine measured measures that really don't reflect what a smoker does. And they are accumulative of particles and some of the chemicals, but they don't really filter them out in order to fulfill the function of a filter, which is to get rid of all of the hazards that might be inhaled from this hazardous product. We know that there are 7,000 chemicals in tobacco. More than 50 to 60 of these or so are carcinogens. And it's something that I think we need to think more about and have much more accurate information, because we've done surveys to show that people don't know that the cigarette filter is made out of plastic. They don't know that it's not protective against any sort of hazardous smoke, and also that it's not biodegradable. So biodegradable filters have been tried. They don't sell cigarettes, and so the tobacco industry has never really marketed them. What we do know is that these things are toxic. Cigarette butts in general are toxic, but even the filter itself without the tobacco on it is toxicity. It's toxic to microorganisms, insects, frogs, worms, all the way up the chain of creatures, including some plants and birds. And that picture down in the lower right-hand corner there was actually taken by an Ottoman photographer, and it is a real picture of a black skimmer feeding its chick a cigarette butt. Well, we don't know if butt waste has any human health effects, but we do know that it has these laboratory-based studies that show effects of it. And they're also not just chemical toxins, but microfibers, that is, the plastics, become something that even when the filter breaks down after years of exposure to the wind and sun, etc., we've got microfibers and nanoplastics that come from these filters. We don't know how much there is, but we have identified them and runoff from the San Francisco Bay Area, in fact. What we do know, again, as I mentioned, there's no health protection from the filter, and it's then classified as an unnecessary, hazardous, ubiquitous tobacco product additive, which is now really considered much more of a waste product than any kind of health benefit. I want to show you a study that we did at SDSU in our environmental sciences lab, where we took an EPA protocol to see about whatever chemicals or products might cause toxicity or be called hazardous to the environment, using test fish, little minnows, both marine and freshwater. And we did this with a dilutional sort of a kind of experiment to see what the concentration of cigarette butts in a liter of water would make the lethal dose 50. That is, where it would kill half the organisms exposed to it. How many cigarette butts would it take in a liter of water to do that? And the standard protocol requires a 96-hour soaking. So that's what we did. Carefully control the oxygen, food, etc. Got rid of diseased fish, etc. So this is, again, a carefully controlled EPA protocol. What we found was on this graph that one cigarette butt in a liter of water kills half the fish. So this would call cigarette butts hazardous waste. And, that isn't generally done, not by the EPA, not by any local or state agencies. But in fact, I think most people now in my field and in the environmental field, as well as the activists such as the surf riders and the Friends of the Earth, etc., would recognize cigarette butts as a hazardous waste that should be better regulated, controlled, perhaps prevented. So electronic cigarettes are another piece of this waste stream that is increasing. 10% of high school students now have been using electronic cigarettes more than they do cigarettes, actually. And these things contain not just plastics, metals, but also the lithium-ion batteries that power these things. They oftentimes have e-liquid reservoirs that are a source of nicotine, and nicotine is a pesticide. So, these things are not, first of all, they're not safe for human consumption, and they're certainly declared a hazardous waste product. And now that has been ascertained by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Food and Drug Administration. They should not be just deposited in the environment, and there's a number of these that are still single-use kind of e-cigarettes. I want to just mention that we've got a research project right now that is trying to figure out what the economic cost of tobacco product waste is in the environment. So we're looking at all the costs, including prevention, the signage and the laws and the enforcement of litter laws cost money, the surface abatement, street cleaning, sweeping. And here, we're talking about the voluntary groups as well, who, it may be free in terms of voluntary labor, but that's not a free item. I mean, that's got an hourly wage equivalent of about $30 an hour. system abatement, trying to filter these things out of wastewater, out of the manage any kind of seepage from landfills, etc., are another part of it. The disposal costs are significant. The volunteers may put up cigarette butt waste disposal. Somebody has to clean those up. Somebody has to maintain them. And then there's what we call the unabated litter. And this is where I was alluding to ecosystems damages. This is the stuff we don't know where all the stuff is that we haven't picked up. And we don't know what the impacts are on long-term ecosystem damages. If nicotine is a pesticide, if there are carcinogens, if there are heavy metals, what is this doing to our ecosystem? We don't know for sure. And will it have human health effects? It may. So what's important is to raise the level of awareness. And there's been a lot of media campaigns on this. The butt cleanups themselves are one way of doing this, but they aren't an answer. Banning outdoor smoking helps. We've seen it when beaches are made smoke-free, the amount of butt waste is reduced. Same with parks, restaurants, streets. Anti-litter fines and enforcement don't work. They're hardly ever enforced. And besides that, it just increases the interaction between who are now the more likely folks to be smoking, who are, lower socioeconomic groups, minorities, etc. We don't want there to be more police interaction with them over something like this. Litter fees have been tried. San Francisco is the only city in the world right now that has a litter fee that they figured out on the basis of actual data how much it costs them to pick up butts from the street. And right now that litter fee, I think, is $1.11 per pack. And that's keeps going up over the years because of the costs of problems with these things is that they are not effective. Cleanups can't pick up all the waste. Enforcement is expensive and ignored. Something called extended producer responsibility is sometimes brought into this, where the industry tries to get involved and they've got, corporate social responsibility projects to do this, but they don't work because they're all downstream. That's not what works when it comes to environmental hazards. We have to look upstream. So what can we do? Well, state and local legislation is possible. We can ban the sale of filtered cigarettes. We've banned the sale of flavored cigarettes, and some people have even banned all tobacco products, like in Beverly Hills and Manhattan Beach. The Sierra Club, Surfright, and other environmental groups have been engaged in this, and they're effective lobbyists, better than us public health nudniks. And, it's important that this kind of partnership, I think, can be effective. Outdoor smoking bans, I do think, are an important thing. They help to denormalize smoking. They'll reduce the number of cigarettes smoked per day, and they will help somewhat with preventing it on the beaches. The litter fees, as I mentioned, I think are underutilized. We have something called the Clean Water Act here in California, where nothing more than 5 millimeters should enter storm drains, and cities are going to be held responsible for that. Well, a cigarette butt is certainly bigger than that. And it's something that, they are going to need to look at in terms of source reduction, I think. The city of Baltimore is suing the tobacco industry for the cost of cleanup. They've been able to get good data from their Mr. Trash Wheel that goes around Baltimore Harbor picking up waste, and they've been able to separate out the tobacco product waste in order to estimate the cost. The European Union has banned single-use plastics. They haven't quite embraced the filter yet on that, but I think they're on the way to it. And then we have this treaty coming up. This is sponsored under the United Nations Environment Program. It began about a year ago, well, no, not even a year ago, and is something that'll finish off in about a year with the ability to include specifically hazardous single-use plastics, such as tobacco products, such as filters, as required, to be controlled as part of this international agreement. So we'll see how that goes. So, I want to close by just emphasizing again, the cellulose acetate cigarette filter is the most collected toxic trash item globally. Upstream solutions are really what are needed. Upstream solution is on these as single-use plastics. They're a health risk, not protective. And this is another piece of messaging that we need to emphasize from the public health side. And we've got specific and strong research to show that these filters that have been put on cigarettes over the last 50 to 60 years have not changed the health risks of smoking. And in fact, some types of lung cancer are actually worse as a result of them. Biodegradable filters will not diminish the weight or toxicity, so they shouldn't be an answer to this. And recycling of these, some people have proposed, and there's one company that tries to do this, it's not logistically, aesthetically, economically, or ethically feasible. So what we need is source reduction. And to do that, we don't need the tobacco industry. What they have supported are cleanups, corporate social responsibility. Philip Morris's website says our world is not an ashtray. Well, if it's not an ashtray, they should stop selling cigarettes, but that's not what they're doing. They're just coming up with new products that have other kinds of waste issues like ECOS and other sort of e-cigarettes. So I just want to close now and say, look, we need strong messaging, just like these surfers in the UK have taken the weather and the risks into their hands of demonstrating on the beach. And I ran into this guy in London who was all about banning plastics, especially single-use plastics, and that these are the single most picked up item in the world, cigarette butts. And I want to thank you for your attention and happy to answer any questions. I'll stop sharing now.
Good deal. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. So let's quickly introduce the group we got. This is an all California program going on right now with Tom in San Diego, with our Paella Master Shags in the Bay Area. Nicely done. I'm in San Jose. My name is Rushton. And let's start with the California angle on this. So often in California, we think about the laws related to smoking as being as restrictive as you'll find anywhere, right? Oh, like California's led the world. And I'm guessing that there are countries that have had quite forward-thinking and aggressive moves to do something about both the health risks and the environmental risks of smoking. Can you speak to examples of that around the planet?
Well, the very best one is Bhutan. It is the world's only non-smoking country. I did have a chance to visit there back in the mid-2000s, and it was true. Nobody was smoking. And you didn't see any cigarette butts anywhere. And as I mentioned, Manhattan Beach and Berkeley, or not Berkeley, but Beverly Hills, California, have banned the sale of all tobacco products. And San Francisco has enacted this litter fee. But there's a lot of conversation right now. The Netherlands and Belgium, as part of the EU, are trying to enact a ban on the sale of filtered cigarettes. New Zealand tried to do it as part of a national strategy, but at the last minute, that little piece was cut out. They've taken some very bold action where they've made a law that nobody born before a certain, or born since I think it's 2008, is eligible to purchase cigarettes. So they're looking at it as a sales restriction. I do think, given the attention to the treaty and given the attention that here in California we're putting onto this, as well as in New York State, by the way, they've had legislation proposed to ban the sale of filtered cigarettes at the state level. I think it's going to happen, and it can happen at a local level, just as Beverly Hills and Manhattan Beach banned all products. Every city and every state can ban the sale of filtered cigarettes. The FDA will not get in their way. The law is specifically written so that this could be a sales restriction, easily done. Now, one idea that came up the other day when I was in a discussion with some lawyers is, well, we can sue the tobacco industry for the responsibility for this waste. One could think about suing the state for not taking its responsibility. And I only say that because there's been 3 attempts in the state legislature to ban the sale of filtered cigarettes over the last, almost 8 years. And I've testified at each one of these events, and always it's the tobacco industry and their representatives and sham groups and people that, get paid off by them that get in the way. So I think it can happen, and it may take communities or maybe environmental groups or other kind of associations to hold the state responsible because it has the ability to do this.
So one of the things about having this kind of much broader sense of the damage being done by these products, right, is that you're working to take in all kinds of things that people don't think about. So the opportunity cost of the farmer who is growing tobacco versus what other things they might be doing. Can you speak a little bit more about the relationship between the tobacco industry and agriculture? Because you were talking about this in much more forceful terms than I felt like I'd heard from anywhere else.
Well, yeah, in many ways, there's 120 countries that grow tobacco. And among these, most are poor countries. And the farmers get, they are dependent on the industry to set the prices. So whatever happens to the pricing, the farmer is the one who actually eats the price change, not the companies. And they are dependent almost in an indentured way to the supply chain of seeds and agricultural tools and equipment, et cetera. And they really are in a very stuck position. And it makes a difference. In a couple of countries, it makes a big difference, like Malawi and Zimbabwe. They depend entirely, or not entirely, but in a large part on tobacco exports, even though hardly anybody smokes there, in that sort of usual sort of population. But the important thing is that, they export this stuff. It's manufactured in cigarettes and then re-exported all over the world. So some of those countries really will suffer. Now, when it comes to what to do about this, we have to just decide to do it. In Canada, they did decide to do it, and they bought out their tobacco growers. And so there's hardly any tobacco grown in Canada now as a result of this. I think there's still some, but they really did a major effort at this. Even here in the United States, when the state's attorneys general settled with the tobacco industry over the healthcare costs of smoking back in 1998, many states got huge payouts from the tobacco industry as a result of their responsibility for the Medicare and Medicaid expenses, that is. And, many states bought out their tobacco farmers and allowed them to get into other kinds of businesses. And this can be done. And there's efforts around the world. I think some major donors have gotten involved in this, Bloomberg especially, and been able to think about how can we help these people get off of that addiction, just as we get people off the cigarette addiction.
And are there other uses for tobacco that people have explored, as a way of kind of simplifying the process of separating the farmers from the industry?
Nothing of any worth. No. I mean, there's been research on, genetic research and stuff. Nothing of any worth, and nothing that can't be done without farmers.
Okay. But let's come back to the central piece of the environmental issue, which is the filters.
Yeah.
So I think you had on a slide that like greater than 99% of cigarettes that are sold are filtered cigarettes, and the filters are essentially what contain the non-biodegradable plastic, and that they're not actually doing what they say they're doing. All right, and so that would seem to be in an industry where they are highly focused on costs and profit. Isn't that merely an expense for them of having the filters in place?
Interestingly enough, a filtered cigarette is cheaper than an unfiltered cigarette. And that's because the tobacco is more expensive than the saleable acetate. There'll be more tobacco. One of the reasons why in the past they think filtered cigarettes showed perhaps some benefit was that there was less tobacco in them, and less of the dose of the chemicals as a result of that. But it's actually cheaper to make an unfiltered cigarette than it is to make a filtered cigarette than an unfiltered cigarette.
Oh, fascinating. All right.
It's not the industry that makes the filter, as I mentioned too. It's the chemical industry. So they're going to fight this, I'm sure.
Okay. Wow. All right. Well, we'll finish the recording with our standard kind of wind down, and then I'll hand it back to you for a final word. But for all of you who have been watching this as a recording, or those of you who've joined in on the recording itself, thank you. Thank you very much for taking part. It is very much our goal to share stories that inspire you to see your potential role to make a difference in your community. That opportunity you have to talk with others about what the concerns are, what kind of issues the folks who are in need may face. And our hope is that you are inspired by these stories, the powerful messages of how this is happening in Bhutan or wherever it might be, right? And what kinds of things can happen when a community organizes. We also hope that you will let us know that you were part of this. There is on our Rotary page down a little bit an attendance form. Just put in there your name and your email address. We're not going to spam you or anything like that, but it is good for us to have a sense of the reach of the program. And at the bottom of our Rotary page, you'll find our discuss forum. That's where you can leave comments about the presentation. You can comment on other elements of the meeting, the Learn Something New video, the inspirational video, even President Nick's message for the week. We hope that you'll engage in a conversation with us in that space as well. As we always like to do, we hand it back to the speaker for the final word. So, Tom, what would you like for people to have clearly in mind as they finish up this video?
Tobacco and cigarettes especially are a full-service insult to the human body and to the environment. And that by joining the environmentalists with public health people, we're going to get a lot closer to what we consider the tobacco endgame, which is hardly any tobacco use and hardly any illness from it, as well as hardly any environmental insult. Thanks for listening.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. And all of you, thank you. We will see you next week.